Have you ever witnessed someone completely snap? What happened? Story 1. I had a coworker get up from her desk, throw her keyboard against the wall, and go sit in the corner and start bawling uncontrollably. The reason? All of the data in her payroll program had been deleted. What actually happened is that she opened the wrong program. Everything was just fine in the correct program. Story 2. I worked at a Mexican grill years ago. The older, quiet dude who always kept to himself, but was basically pleasant, just lost it one day. He was chopping chicken to put on the line when one of the line employees called out 86 chicken. The guy loses it. I'm already making chicken. He throws the chopping knife sideways at the wall, and the tip of it sticks. He pulls it out and throws it again toward the line, narrowly missing an employee. The knife lands in the barbacoa, splattering juices all over. Then he calmly took off his gloves and apron and left. Middle school, little skinny kid, strung out all the time and kind of bad in school, but not mentally ill. Just had a home life, and it made him look like a druggie from lack of sleep, and I suspect in hindsight regular meals. He was quiet, usually polite, but really didn't have any friends that I can remember. There was this little group of middle schoolers that just picked on this guy all the time, spread rumors about his family behind his back, accidentally bumped shoulders with him in the hallway to make his book scatter, accidentally spilling drinks during lunch to get on his clothes, and countless other things to inconvenience this kid and humiliate him. I can't remember if they had a reason, and people reported them to teachers a couple times, but they always insisted it was all accidental, and the kid just had bad luck. They got detention at worst. Most evidence was circumstantial. Skinny kid didn't act out towards them, didn't defend himself, just kept his head down and trotted on. One day his locker was a few doors down from mine. He had dropped a pencil. I happened to pick it up and hand it back to him. He gave me a smile and tucked it in his pocket. "Watch this," he said, in that quiet, barely there voice of his. The little were coming back down the hallway. I'd seen it happen enough that I could already tell they were aiming for a body check. Something about the way they focused on him while they walked, and kind of drifted sideways to be in the center of the hall instead of one side or the other. He had his books in one hand, and the other hand in his pocket as he started walking down the hallway toward the group. Right as the ringleader pushed to the side to shoulder check him, he whipped his hand up and lunged into the other guy. The pencil stabbed right into the other guy's shoulder, pushed by the momentum of both of their bodies. Bully dropped like a rock, shrieking, pencil sticking out of his shoulder, just under his collarbone. I remember thinking it was unlucky he had decided to wear such a wide collar. The pencil missed cloth entirely. I was also thinking, holy, I'm so glad I was nice to him. Just now, skinny kid just kept walking down the hall. Skinny kid was expelled. After that day, I never saw him again. We weren't really friends, but I hope his life turned out okay. Story 3. Back in middle school, I remember there was this kid who got bullied, and one day he punched the bully. They both went down and started wailing on each other. The kid got his kicked, but he didn't get bullied again after that day. Story 4. I worked in this rehab halfway house a few years ago, and this one kid would repeatedly steal other residents' money. I basically caught him in the act and confronted him, and he absolutely flipped. He took out his wallet, ripped up all the money, and threw into my face. Something changed in that moment, and his face was just pure rage. I noped out of there real quick, and he chased me down the stairs, and then outside where he proceeded to scream at the top of his lungs. Not saying anything, just screaming. He eventually walked off and didn't see him for hours. The next day, his counselor asked me what happened, and I told her, and she proceeds to tell me, poor kid. He's just nervous about his court case today. Me, what's the charge? Counselor assault with a deadly weapon. Thanks for the heads up. 210 job would not do again. Edit his drug of choice was spice synthetic weed. I've seen people coming on everything, but I gotta say that stuff will mess people up permanently. Story 5. Out at a bar, when some guy grabbed the of a married woman. She didn't say anything, just looked across the bar at her husband, a man about 68, at least 280 pounds of pure muscle, like ridiculously big. How the grabber remained conscious for the savage beating he received before 5 or 6 people pulled him apart was actually surprising. He landed maybe one hit before he got sent through a table. Story 6. My dad was in traffic once, and he saw a car break down. The guy wearing a business suit casually got out of the car, opened the trunk, and got an aluminum baseball bat. He then proceeded to beat the living out of the car, windows, lights, the whole work. Once he was finished, he fished out his briefcase from the now ruined car, ripped off the license plate from the car, then casually calmly walked to work. We think. Edit 1. Thanks for the gold. Edit 2. This happened in the mid to late 80s, and like a lot of people here, I thought the same thing when I saw the movie with Michael Douglas the first time, although IRC, the character, didn't trash his car before leaving. Right? Story 7. I used to work as a private security guard, and one of the most common assignments was working weddings, which was usually a nice change of pace from the usual work sites. So I'm at this wedding, and the 2 Hispanic families are fairly large, and booze is freely flowing. For the most part, they were loud, but there wasn't any trouble. The rest of the reception goes off without much issue aside from me observing the crowd, and I see a guy that looked quite discontent at reception. I figured he wasn't too social. I thought it would mostly be uneventful. Well, I was wrong, as when the time came for the best man to give a speech, I saw the guy from earlier come up from his table. He must have been no older than 23 or so, and he looked determined and angry. The bride looks at this guy as she's quite anxious as to what he'll say. This young guy interrupts the best man by taking the mic. He paused for a moment and wipes his eye, him thinking great another emotional speech by a drunk guest. But alas, nope, it was far better. It turns out the guy is a really close friend of the bride and professes his love for her. That the pregnant bride's child is his. The bride looks mortified, and his emotional speech turns from a drunken profession of love to straight-up anger and resentment. He then insults the groom and the groom's family. The father of the bride, the groom, and groom's friends are absolutely livid and ready to beat the living out of the guy, but I'll have to hand it to the guy as he was smart, and he had brought his friends, and it looked like the Royal Rumble, as the men are just brawling, chairs are being thrown. The bride is leaving sobbing, her friends and family in tow. It's just a sea of people before the other family members, and a few of my fellow guards could even get there to even attempt to break up the fight. By then the cops were already there, quite a few people were arrested. The venue was pretty much trashed. TLDR, a close friend of the bride, professes his love for her. Big fight ensues, resulting in a ruined wedding, and people were arrested. Story 8, I used to work with a very angry dude, like meds and therapy angry. I never knew for sure, but the rumor was he was bipolar. Usually he would flip out over something stupid. When he had his minor freakouts, it would involve cussing and throwing. One day, we had a particularly stressful day on the job. It seemed like nothing we were doing was working out right, and our plans for that day's work had fallen apart. Sprinkle in a few rude customers and a few equipment breakdowns, I knew that this guy was on the verge of breaking. Doomsday, as we called it, had been free of his minor freakouts. We thought that maybe his therapy and meds were working, but it turns out it was just the calm before the storm. One task we did required me and this angry guy to work on something together. The entire time, he was talking to himself under his breath and was very short, like, give me that. Or do this just a few words at a time and in an angry voice. This wasn't uncommon from him, so I didn't think much of it. I'm really not sure what was the straw that broke the camel's back, but whatever it was opened a floodgate. This guy was in the process of backing up one of our semi-trucks when all of a sudden he just slams on the brakes. All of us kind of stop and look at each other like, oh, he climbs out and slams the door super hard. Then he kicks a pile of rocks next to him. He marches inside the warehouse, and we heard him rummage around the tool cabinet and come back out with a wrench. He proceeds to beat the out-of-the-tool box on the truck. Then he hops back in and continues to back the truck up. We thought his outburst was over, but didn't know that would have been too simple. After he got the truck backed up, we were loading it. He just stood off to the side and watched while occasionally cussing about something or slamming his fist down on the table. All of us were walking on eggshells, trying not to set him off. The finally break came out of nowhere. He yelled, "Fuck it," and hopped in his pickup and drove off, spinning tires and flooring it. He was gone for no more than 10 minutes and came back like a bat out of. He hauled across our gravel parking lot to the back second warehouse. Me and my friend hoped on a golf cart and took off after him. We found him outside the second warehouse next to a troublesome piece of equipment. At a safe distance, we watched as he used a cutting torch, sledgehammer, and other various tools to completely destroy this thing. Once it was down to a pile of scrap metal, he loaded it up part by part into his pickup. He made sure to throw each piece as hard as he could. Sometimes he would burn his hand on a still hot chunk, and he would cuss and walk around while holding his hand in his mouth. The boss had gotten word of what this dude was doing and came over to watch. After he had the metal loaded up, he peeled out, in reverse this time, and was making a beeline for a small pond we had on our campus. Once dangerously close, he slammed on the brakes, and all the scraps flew out the back into the pond. He got out to check his work and threw a few pieces that didn't make it into the water as far as he could. Seeming satisfied, he peeled out again and made his way into the warehouse. As in, he drove full speed through the large garage door and left black marks across the floor. We watched from the golf cart as people had to literally jump out of the way. Once back inside the warehouse, he hopped on the forklift and began loading empty pallets into the back of his pickup. Once his pickup was sagging from the weight, he took off again. As he rounded a corner, some of the pallets fell off, and he got out. He punched and kicked them as he reloaded them by hand. Then he walked into the warehouse and took 6 ratchet straps and secured the out of his load. Then he took off into the sunset. We all just kind of stood in shock for a bit, trying to figure out what the had just happened. The boss tried to call him, but he wouldn't answer. After some time, we all got back to work and sort of forgot about his freak out as we had a ton of work to do. When the day was wrapping up, this guy was nowhere to be found, and he still wouldn't answer his phone. And my friend took off to go look for him. It was a small town, so we hit up the few bars in his house, but couldn't find him. We went to our second location in town, and he wasn't there, but deep tire marks and the lack of pallets told us he had been there at some point. This location was unmanned unless we needed it, so no one had been around to see if he was there. An idea struck us. Maybe he had gone to the landfill to throw away the pallets. We go there, but the main gate was closed. A single employee remained. Since we went there a lot to toss out our own trash, he recognized us. He said something to the effect of, "Are you looking for that angry guy?" We said yes, and he let us in. We drove around the various pits looking for him. We eventually found him in one of the lone back pits. He was tearing apart each pallet nail by nail and throwing them into a pile of more pallets. We stood and watched for a bit, and then he said in a really pissed-off tone, "Are you just going to stand and watch, or are you going to help?" So we grabbed what tools he had, and we helped tear apart the last few pallets. After we were done, he took off like a bat out of a gun. After that day, he never mentioned it again, and the boss sat him down for a long talk. The boss told him he needed to take a few days off and think long and hard if this job was for him. The boss also upped his allowance for health care under the condition he would use it for mental health care. As far as I know, he enrolled in an intense anger management course and got on some stronger meds. He still had his minor freakouts from time to time, but nothing like that. I haven't worked at that place in years, but from what I hear, he is doing much better. We still have no clue what caused him to snap and why on earth he decided to do the things he did. I will give props to the boss for not just firing him on the spot and giving him a second chance and giving him help. He was easily the most productive employee, so that was probably a factor. Story 9. There was a kid in school named Davis. There was another kid named Blake. Davis was big. Blake was not. Blake liked to jump on Davis' back, and Davis would always swing him off in a playful way. One day, Blake jumped on Davis' back as usual and latched on. Davis snapped. He screamed "Blake" as he grabbed Blake by his hands and aggressively flipped him over his head and slammed him onto the pavement. Blake was stunned, and his attempt to stand back up was fruitless as Davis began to repeatedly and ruthlessly kick Blake while he was down. We all just watched. We were in shock. We didn't help, we just watched. Eventually, a teacher stopped the beating, Davis got suspended, and Blake somehow ended up being okay. They were friends again the next week. Story 10. When I worked behind the counter at a gourmet deli in a natural foods grocer, there was a day where this one lady had been served a piece of fish by another employee. I hadn't been a part of this transaction. However, I was the one who helped her when she returned to the counter to complain about the fish. She handed the box back to me, saying, "Hi, I asked for a piece of the halibut from the hot case. And this is a piece of chicken," not knowing that she was off her rocker. I took her word and replied with, "Okay, sure, I'm sorry for the mistake, let me help you out." I took the box that her food was in and prepared to grab her some halibut, but thought maybe I should check the inside of the box just to see what happened. I peek in there, and what do I find other than a piece of halibut at this point, as gently as I can. I tell her, "Ma'am, I'm happy to grab you another piece of fish, but it's only going to look like the one you've got right here because this is indeed a piece of..." At this point, she cuts me off and starts screaming at me. "Don't tell me that's a piece of fish. If you tell me that a piece of fish, I am going to be so mad I'll spit in your face." This lady was old and disheveled looking, so I decided to take her at her word and retreat from a situation as quickly as possible. Grabbed her another piece of fish and told her sweetly that I hoped her day continued to be as wonderful as it had clearly been. Flagged down a manager who followed her around the store to make sure she didn't break steel as she proceeded to walk through the store, ranting loudly and profanely about how nobody respects her and how she wanted to spit in my face. Seriously, you meet the weirdest people working in a grocery store, especially an upscale hippie one. Story 11. I can't recall my exact age when this happened. Maybe around 6 to 8 years old. My over a year younger sister and I were in the living room watching TV. My sister was sitting on the floor and I was sitting on the couch. Out of the blue, our mother walks into the room, carrying 2 heaping plates of spinach. Nothing else, just spinach. She lays the plates in front of us. Sister complained that she didn't want any spinach. That's all it took to trigger my mother's inner psychotic. At that, she pounced on Sister, grabbed a fistful of Sister's hair at the back of her head, pulled her head back, and with the other hand started scooping up the spinach with her fingers and slamming the spinach in Sister's mouth, while screaming at the top of her lungs, "Eat, I eat, I made it now, you're going to eat it." My poor sister. 1 minute, she's watching TV, peacefully minding her own business. The next minute, she's got this screaming, raving lunatic directly on top of her, physically assaulting her, literally trying to shove spinach down her throat. Story 12. When I was 19, I lived in a house with my then boyfriend, his friend Darren, and his girlfriend Meg, and this other guy, Steve, who was older, probably mid-20s, who also had a long-term girlfriend that stayed over most of the time, but didn't technically live there. A little background: this was not the ideal living arrangement. It was on the border of a not-so-great area. The conditions of the house were pretty grody, and there was a fair amount of drug use that happened there. Also should mention that Steve and his girlfriend fought a lot, some fights turning somewhat violent. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Steve came home late at night and was in the middle of a phone call with his girlfriend, who presumably was trying to break up with him. There was lots of screaming that turned into sobbing that turned into begging. He locked himself in the bathroom and let out the most blood-curdling scream. Screaming and smashing and sobbing. Darren tried to talk to him through the door, but he wouldn't have it. He continuously said things about how he wanted to die, how he was going to go to her house and kill himself in front of her. At this point, someone had called his dad. The two were close and asked him to come over to help because we didn't know how to handle the situation. There's a super loud crashing sound, like glass breaking. Steve busted the bathroom door open and ran past Aaron, blood dripping down his face, bolted out the door and into the street with no shoes on, in the snow, screaming for "Sir, I see," as if he's going to jump in front of it. We look in the bathroom, and it's completely torn apart. The mirror is cracked from him punching it. There's blood in the sink and on the floor. Everything is thrown about, and the back of the toilet is completely cracked in half. He broke the toilet with his face. Witnessing this was terrifying, watching the complete breakdown of a grown man, especially when I was still relatively young and had never seen anything like this before in my life. Darren went outside and tried to find where he went, but he was long gone. His dad eventually found him sitting on his ex-girlfriend's front porch, in the cold and the snow and the dark, just sitting there, not moving. He had run all the way there. It wasn't very close. She wasn't home, which was probably a very good thing. Edit spelling TLDR, my roommate's girlfriend broke up with him, and he locked himself in the bathroom, had a complete mental breakdown, and broke the toilet with his face. Story 13, it was me. Let me see if I can find that old comment. The last time I snapped was the summer of 4th grade. A girl who had tormented me all summer, verbally convinced all the kids to not talk to me, threw my books in the mud, and so on, accidentally beamed me in the head with one of those giant rubber. Hurt like I was a small kid, and it actually took me to the ground. We both knew she'd get away with it. Nobody else was around. I'm never going to forget the smile on her face. Next thing I knew, I had my hands on her neck. Extra context, the next day, I got called into the front office. Her mom gave some sob story about how her daughter wouldn't even touch her dinner, was super quiet all afternoon. She's such a happy girl. She's never like this. The girl was suspiciously silent, could she say. So the lady in charge told me to explain what happened. So this little 10 years old went over and said we had a fight. I said something mean. I'm so sorry. Tears and everything. It was crazy. The kid is stunned. Her mom and the teacher all jumped me. "Oh, it's okay, sweetheart. You apologized. You're such a nice little girl. We didn't mean it. I didn't rat her out for the bullying, but she never came near me again." Edit 4th, not 6th. Story 14. They were in our ER and didn't like the fact that they had to wait to get a few stitches in their head. Didn't want to hear that the critical patients came first. The guy was drunk and punched one of the admitting staff in the face, wound up being tackled by security, cuffed, and put into the psychiatric observation suite overnight. Then the police arrested him for assault. Story 15 saw a stripper go insane. She climbed on stage, screaming like a banshee, grabbed the stripper pole, and started shaking it like an unwanted baby. The manager came behind her and grabbed her in a bear hug. Stripper shoved her fake nails, the super long ones, in manager's eyes. They pierced both eyelids and went inside his head. The guy later told me that he could feel the nails scratching the back of his eyeballs. I have no idea on what kind of drug she was on, but the manager threw her outside on the ground. He then punted her down a flight of stairs so hard she actually flew and landed face first in the parking lot. She got up like nothing happened and resumed, he screaming and running around. Story 16, during a charity event. The manager of a pizza place I used to work at couldn't handle the stress. After being hit with a string of complaints, he finally yelled out in a high-pitched voice, "I hate working here." He then proceeded to pound his head on the walk-in door, leaving a few dents behind. He was 23 at the time. Story 17, this winter, I had a layover in Denver airport. Me and every person who flied with Frontier was stuck there for 3 days. I had to switch flights 3 times into 2 different locations. I had joined a group of people who were also trying to fly back to Southern California, and we were waiting for the last flight to LA. I was supposed to fly into San Diego. An alarm went off with the message, "This is a tornado drill. Please make your way to the tornado shelters downstairs." I then observed a man stand up, start to laugh uncontrollably, collapse onto the floor, still laughing, and had to be carried off for some type of help. I would have done the same, but I had not slept in 3 days and was about 6 shots of vodka. So I was in a marginal coma when it came to reacting. But the man had lost his mind by losing another trip home. Story 18, my husband, a typically calm and stoic type, hauled off and punched a guy in the jaw. We were at a bar, enjoying a few drinks and some bar food for my birthday. It's more fun than you think if you're not there to get trashed anyway. This very drunk guy came up and started asking my husband, U.S.-born man of Middle Eastern descent, how it felt to be part of a terrorist nation. My husband brushed him off with a joke, and the guy backed off for a little bit. Sometime later, I was pretty tipsy, so who knows how long he came back and started calling me a terrorist girl and asked why I didn't have a mask on because didn't people like my husband beat women for showing off there? And that burst some bubble my husband had put around us. And he just stood up without saying anything and punched him. Guy hit the floor, everyone in the bar lost their minds, and the guy got up ready to fight my husband. BBY, then the bartender was on us and got the story for a couple fairly sober girls that were sitting behind us. TLDR, ignorant guy got punched by my pacifist husband and then kicked out of a bar for being... Story 19, when I was in junior high school, my friends and I all had a sleepover party at my house. It must have been like 20 of us, and it was a good mix of both boys and girls, and we had an awesome time. One of our friends, let's call him James, was there for the sleepover, and we were all surprised because his parents were pretty strict, and so he was never allowed to stay out late, let alone sleep over someone's house. But regardless, we were happy he made it out. Around 10 p.m., my mom calls me over and tells me that James' mom just called and asked if he was over our place. Apparently, he never told his parents about the sleepover since he knew they wouldn't let him join, and so he decided to just come over without their permission. We were probably 11 or 12 at the time, so disobeying parents was unheard of. So once his parents found out, James was forced to call his parents, and for whatever dumb reason, he decided to call them on speakerphone. In front of all of our friends, he asked his mom politely if he could stay and told her that she was on speakerphone. And so if she said no, everyone would know that she was being a... This was absolutely stunning, as the idea of cursing at your parents was unheard of to me and most, if not all, of my friends. She was quiet for a second, then immediately told him to take her off speaker. He then completely snapped, yelled from the of his lungs, and said, you am staying, and if you dare try to come pick me up, I will slap you. He said this maybe like 3 or 4 times while screaming and crying. Needless to say, the room got completely awkward. He hung up the phone and started screaming at us, "What are you looking at, you dumb? You're just like my dumb mom." I tried to tell him to calm down, but he was entirely gone in his head. My dad had to come downstairs to tell him that his parents were at the door and that he should go talk to them. We all peeked out to listen to the conversation and see what would happen. And just as he promised, the moment his mom came to grab his arm to take him into her car, James slapped the living out of his mom, breaking her glasses and giving her a nosebleed. My dad ended up intervening. He grabbed James sternly by the arm, looked at him, and told James that he will never do that again, and that he's lucky he wasn't his son or else had kicked the out of him, which was true. My dad was a Vietnam vet and was someone not to be messed with. He never beat us, but he sure did scare the out of me and all my friends. Anyway, James was taken home kicking and screaming, and the rest of us could not wait until the following Monday to hear what happened. Unfortunately, he didn't show up to school. We found out from our teacher that James was no longer a student and that he had transferred to another school. We never heard from him or his family again. Not sure whatever happened to him, but I hope he and his family got some help. They obviously had some major emotional issues to deal with. I've snapped once in my life, and I hope I never do again. I walked in on an Afghan soldier deep in a 12-year-old boy. Story 20, my mom has snapped on multiple occasions. By snapped, I mean we have had to put her in a mental health facility. The first one I remember was after my grandfather died. She was fine up until a day before the funeral. She was writing weird and creepy things that made no sense. When she spoke, nothing made sense. At one point, we agreed that my cousins, who were 3 and 6 at the time, didn't need to see him in a casket. So that wasn't their last memory of him. My mother comes out, and she grabs onto them and starts trying to take them into the room with the casket. I had to grab my mother's arm and rip it off of them and near yell no at her to finally get her to stop. It was the first moment when I could really tell something was wrong. During the funeral service, she acted like a small child who just wants to go home, stomping her foot when somebody took too long or saying, "Hurry up." My uncle looked her in the eye and had to tell her to stop. It was really bad and hard to watch. When we finally got home, my dad put her to bed, and she just sat there upright staring at the wall. The next morning, my dad had to take her to the mental hospital because she just started throwing random things and was very unresponsive. The worst part is it was on my younger brother's birthday. Story 21, I was the one who snapped, but way back when I was a sophomore in high school. I was the new girl at a very small school. Being shy and awkward, I was bullied by just about everyone in my grade. I usually just kept my head down and ignored it, but one day I was standing at my teacher's desk getting help, and I heard someone whisper something, and I lost it. I slammed my books down and told her if she didn't shut up, I was going to shut her up, and then stormed out. My teacher ran out after me and found me having my very first panic attack. Story 22, I was the one who snapped. To set it up, I was working in after-school childcare. All year long, I worked with another counselor who was in charge off the same classroom as me. We had a class of 7 to 8-year-olds. I had known over half this class since they were 5 or 6. They were my babies. The coworker was 18, 19. I was not much older. We were the fun teachers that all the kids loved to be around simply because I always supplied the kids with creative and fun art projects. I poured in a lot of money, so they would have a lot of fun. I would nicely correct my coworker on her behavior whenever she'd make stupid comments. "Oh, if you misbehave, Bob, I will make you work with only a group of girls. Yeah, no, that's not going to fly with me. Don't teach boys that working with girls sucks or is gross. None of us had proper childcare training. BTW. One day, I left the classroom for a few minutes to run an errand. I don't even remember what is was getting paper. Anyways, at the time the class was getting ready to play outside by cleaning up the classroom. When I came back, all the kids were sitting in a line against the wall near the door very quietly. One girl was crying off to the side. I was immediately alarmed. Why was she crying? I asked. The coworker huffed. She wouldn't be quiet, so she's not allowed to go outside. I took the little girl outside into the hallway and sat her down. It took several tries to get her to talk to me. Other counselor told all the kids to be quiet. One of the other kids wouldn't stop talking, so the girl told him to be quiet. Immediately the teacher yelled at her, had her stand in front of the other kids, and berated her in front of all of them. She humiliated the little girl in front of the whole class. I felt a literal snap. I saw red. My face was hot. I swung into the room and calmly asked the teacher if what she described happened. She agreed. Yes, she did. I raised my voice loudly. I berated her in front of the class. If you want to humiliate a child in front of their peers, then I will do the same to you. I had never yelled like that in front of the kids. They had never seen me act the way I did. I told her to apologize to the girl. I told her that what she was wrong, and how dare she. She apologized to the little girl. I told everyone to go outside to play. Other counselor interrupted, except the girl. She's staying inside for not listening. I whipped my head around and raised my voice again. She will be going outside to play. Don't you even pull that bull with me. I made the coworker cry. She went to the corner of the playground and cried. I didn't give a. That little girl loved me a lot more ever since that day. Her mother came a few days later to thank me about defending her daughter and how she talked about me all the time and how she loved me. No, I didn't get in trouble. Story 23. I've seen a few snaps. The first one was my ex-roommate had a complete emotional breakdown where he sat quietly in peculiar places for minutes at a time until he settled on the living room floor and started sobbing. The second one was a different ex-housemate thought he was being spied on, and I came home right after he destroyed the living room. He had flipped the coffee table, breaking all of the dishes. Luckily, he missed the TV, punched 2 holes in the windows on the door, and threw over one of our plastic Raleigh shelves. Then later in the night, literally ripped his doorknob from his door and replaced it with a deadbolt, refusing to speak to me or my fiancée, and then insisted on having a cop present before saying anything to us. Scariest snap I've ever witnessed, and very creepy because this guy felt he was in danger of what I'm not sure, and there was nothing posing a danger to him, and the fact he felt that way in a house made me think I was in danger, and him not explaining anything made it that much worse. That guy needs help, and I hope he found it. Guy, if you're reading this, I hope Florida has been much better to you, and your mind is in a better place. Also, I still need your car title to get it out of my fiancé's parents' yard.